The clock on the library wall read 6:47 p.m., and the silence was deafening. Most kids had been picked up hours ago, their laughter echoing down empty hallways before fading into memory. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But there she was again, 8-year-old Sophia Mitchell, sitting cross-legged on the worn carpet between the fiction shelves, her designer backpack unopened beside her. Her blonde hair caught the last rays of sunlight streaming through tall windows, but her green eyes held a sadness that made Liam's chest tighten. This was the fourth night this week he'd found her here, alone, waiting for a mother who never seemed to come. Liam pushed his cleaning cart quietly past the library entrance, the wheels squeaking softly against polished floors. He'd been the night custodian at Westfield Academy for 3 years now. Ever since Maria passed, and he needed flexible hours to care for his 6-year-old son, David. The job paid barely enough to cover rent on their one-bedroom apartment, but it meant he could drop David at school in the morning and pick him up in the afternoon. Most nights, David would sit at the front desk doing homework while Liam mopped floors and emptied trash bins. But tonight was different. David was at his grandmother's, and something about the little girl's posture, the way she hugged her knees to her chest, reminded him of his own son during those first terrible months after Maria's diagnosis. Westfield Academy catered to Denver's elite, children of tech moguls and oil executives who arrived each morning in luxury SUVs driven by nannies or personal assistants. Liam had learned to be invisible here, nodding politely to parents who looked through him as if he were part of the furniture. He understood the rules of this world where his 3-year-old work boots and faded uniform marked him as someone who didn't belong. But children were different. Children saw people, not uniforms. And this particular child looked like she needed someone to see her too. Sophia Mitchell was Rebecca Mitchell's daughter, though Liam had only seen the famous CEO once, rushing through the lobby in expensive heels while barking orders into a phone. Mitchell Industries had revolutionized medical technology, making Rebecca one of the most powerful women in Colorado. Her face graced magazine covers with headlines about breaking glass ceilings and building empires. But her daughter spent most evenings alone in the library, forgotten until the aftercare program supervisor remembered to call the Mitchell family driver. Liam had worked enough late shifts to recognize the pattern. The other kids would be collected by 5:30, chattering excitedly about soccer practice or piano lessons. Sophia would remain, sometimes pretending to read, sometimes just staring out the window at the parking lot. Principal Torres would eventually make the call, always apologetic, always met with the same response from Rebecca's assistant about unexpected meetings running late. The driver would arrive by 7, usually finding Sophia asleep against the bookshelf. Tonight felt different, though. Maybe it was the way she'd looked up earlier when he passed, her eyes following his movements with curiosity, rather than the usual polite indifference children showed adults they didn't know. Or maybe it was the book in her lap, a collection of fairy tales that reminded him of the stories Maria used to read to David before bedtime. Whatever it was, Liam found himself parking his cart outside the library door and taking a deep breath. The library smelled like old paper and cleaning solution, a combination that had become as familiar to Liam as his own reflection. He'd spent countless nights in this space, running a dust cloth over shelves while his mind wandered to bills and bedtime stories and the constant worry about whether he was enough for David.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
The job was simple, repetitive work that left his hands busy and his thoughts free to roam. But tonight, those thoughts kept circling back to the small figure curled up between the stacks. Sophia looked up as his footsteps approached, her expression shifting from resignation to mild surprise. Most adults walked past without acknowledgement, treating her like an inconvenient fixture that would eventually be collected and removed. But Liam stopped, his weathered hands resting on the cart's handle as he studied her face. She had the kind of delicate features that would photograph well for the society pages her mother occasionally graced, but there was something in her eyes that spoke of too many nights spent waiting, too many promises broken by boardroom emergencies. "Excuse me," Liam said softly, his voice carrying the gentle tone he used when David woke from nightmares. "I don't mean to bother you, but I noticed you're here pretty late. Everything okay?" Sophia's grip tightened on the book in her lap, her knuckles white against the colorful cover. She looked up at him with those startling green eyes, and for a moment, Liam saw something flicker across her face. Surprise, maybe? Or hope? "I'm waiting for my mom," she said, the words practiced, rehearsed. She had an important meeting that ran over. Liam nodded, recognizing the script. He'd heard variations of it from the aftercare supervisor, from Principal Torres, from the other custodial staff who'd found Sophia in empty classrooms or wandering the hallways long after the final bell. "That's a good book you've got there," he said, gesturing to the fairy tale collection. "My son David loves those stories, especially the one about the shoemaker and the elves." Something shifted in Sophia's expression, a crack in the careful composure she wore like armor. "You have a son?" "I do. He's about your age, maybe a little younger, 6 years old and full of questions about everything." Liam smiled, thinking of David's endless curiosity about how things worked, why birds could fly, what made the moon change shape. "He's staying with his grandmother tonight, but usually he sits right over there doing his homework while I clean." He pointed to the reading area near the librarian's desk where David had claimed a favorite chair and made friends with every book within reach. Sophia glanced toward the spot, then back at Liam. "Does he like fairy tales?" "Loves them, though he always asks me to change the endings, says they're too predictable." Liam chuckled, remembering just last week when David had insisted that Goldilocks should have apologized to the bears and helped them fix their chairs instead of running away. He thinks every story should end with everyone becoming friends. "That would be nice," Sophia said quietly, and something in her tone made Liam's heart ache. She looked down at the book again, tracing the spine with one small finger. "My mom used to read to me. Before she got so busy, she did all the voices, made them sound different for each character." The past tense hit Liam like a physical blow. He'd heard it in his own voice those first months after Maria's death, the way grief transformed present joy into past memory without warning. But Sophia's mother wasn't gone, just absent, which somehow felt worse. Death was final, unchosen. This was different. "Would you like me to read one?" The words left his mouth before he'd fully formed the thought. "I mean, if you're waiting anyway, and if you don't mind, I'm not as good as your mom probably was, but I've had some practice with David." Sophia's eyes widened, and for the first time since he'd approached her, she looked like the 8-year-old she was rather than a miniature adult carrying invisible weight. "You would do that? Even though you're working?" "The floors can wait," Liam said, surprising himself with how easily the decision came. He'd spent 3 years at Westfield Academy, following schedules and protocols, maintaining the careful distance between service staff and students that kept everyone comfortable. But something about Sophia's careful politeness, her practiced patience, reminded him too much of David learning to navigate the world without his mother. "Which story would you like to hear?" Sophia opened the book, pages rustling as she flipped through familiar stories. Her fingers paused at a tale Liam recognized, one Maria had read countless times to David when he was younger. "This one," she said, pointing to an illustration of a young girl in a red cloak walking through dark woods. "Little Red Riding Hood. But could you—" She hesitated, biting her lower lip. "Could you do the voices, like my mom used to?" Liam settled cross-legged on the carpet beside her, his knees protesting the unfamiliar position. Up close, he could see the careful details of her appearance, the expensive clothes that somehow looked too formal for an 8-year-old, the way her hair was styled perfectly despite spending hours alone in the library. Everything about her spoke of money and privilege, but her eyes held the same loneliness he'd seen in David's face during those first terrible weeks when bedtime stories couldn't chase away the nightmares. "Once upon a time," Liam began, pitching his voice higher and lighter for the narrator, "there was a little girl who lived with her mother at the edge of a great forest." He glanced at Sophia, who had scooted closer, her attention completely focused on his words. "Everyone called her Little Red Riding Hood because she always wore a bright red cloak that her grandmother had made for her." As he continued the story, Liam found himself settling into the rhythm, his voice shifting for each character. He made the wolf sound sophisticated and sly rather than traditionally menacing, the way David preferred it. Little Red Riding Hood became curious and brave instead of naive. The grandmother was spunky and clever, quick-thinking enough to hide when danger approached. Sophia hung on every word, her eyes lighting up when Liam gave the wolf a dramatic flourish or made Red Riding Hood sound particularly determined. When he reached the part where the huntsman arrived, she leaned forward, anticipating the resolution. But instead of the traditional ending, Liam found himself following David's philosophy, letting the wolf apologize and explaining that he'd been lonely and scared, not truly evil. "And from that day forward," Liam concluded, closing the book gently, "Little Red Riding Hood visited her grandmother every week, and sometimes the wolf would join them for tea and tell stories about life in the deep forest. Because everyone, even wolves, just want someone to understand them." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, processing the modified ending. "That's different from the way my mom told it," she said, finally, "but I think I like it better. The wolf wasn't really bad, was he? Just lonely." "Sometimes people do the wrong things for the right reasons," Liam said, thinking of his own choices, the way he'd taken this job, not because he loved cleaning floors, but because it was the only way to be present for David. Doesn't make it okay, but it makes it understandable. The sound of heels clicking against polished floor interrupted the moment, sharp and efficient. Sophia's posture changed instantly, straightening as if pulled by invisible strings. The driver, Liam realized, though when he looked up, it wasn't the usual elderly man who collected Sophia. Instead, a woman in an expensive suit stood at the library entrance, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect chignon, her face familiar from magazine covers and news articles. Rebecca Mitchell looked exactly like her daughter would in 30 years, the same delicate features and green eyes. But where Sophia's expression held vulnerability, Rebecca's was carefully controlled. Her gaze swept the library, taking in the scene, her daughter sitting on the floor beside the night custodian, a book of fairy tales between them. "Sophia," Rebecca said, her voice carrying the same authoritative tone Liam imagined she used in boardrooms, "I'm sorry I'm late. The merger negotiations ran longer than expected." Her eyes flicked to Liam, and she saw the moment she categorized him, filed him away as hired help who'd overstepped boundaries. Sophia scrambled to her feet, smoothing down her skirt and gathering her backpack with practiced efficiency. "It's okay, Mom. Liam was reading me a story while I waited." "Liam?" Rebecca's eyebrows rose slightly, and Liam realized that Sophia knowing his name probably seemed inappropriate, too familiar. He stood as well, suddenly aware of his uniform, his scuffed boots, the way he must look to someone like Rebecca Mitchell. "The Custodian," Sophia explained, and Liam heard pride in her voice that made his chest warm. "He knows all the best stories. He changes the ending so everyone gets to be friends." Rebecca's expression softened almost imperceptibly as she looked at her daughter, but when her gaze returned to Liam, the professional mask was firmly in place. "That was very kind of you," she said, the words polite but distant. "Thank you for keeping her company." "Of course," Liam replied, stepping back to give them space. "Anytime." As mother and daughter walked toward the exit, Liam heard Sophia's voice, bright with excitement, as she recounted the modified fairy tale. Rebecca's responses were distracted, checking her phone even as they talked. At the library entrance, Sophia turned back, her eyes finding Liam's across the space. "Will you be here tomorrow?" she called out, ignoring her mother's gentle tug toward the door. "I'll be here," Liam promised, and meant it. The next evening, Liam found himself looking forward to a shift in a way he hadn't experienced since Maria's illness changed everything about their daily routine. David chattered excitedly over dinner about a science project involving volcanoes, his small hands gesturing wildly as he described how baking soda and vinegar could create eruptions. But even as Liam listened and responded appropriately, part of his mind kept drifting to the library, wondering if Sophia would be there again, if she'd want to hear another story. He didn't have to wonder long. When he pushed his cart past the library entrance at 6:30, she was already in her familiar spot between the shelves, though tonight she had a different book in her lap. She looked up immediately when she heard his approach, her face brightening in a way that made Liam's steps quicken involuntarily. "You came back," she said, as if she genuinely doubted his promise. "I said I would be here," Liam replied, parking his cart and settling onto the carpet beside her. "What are we reading tonight?" Sophia held up a thick volume of Hans Christian Andersen tales, her finger marking a page near the middle. "The Ugly Duckling. But I was thinking, maybe we could change this ending too. Make it so the other ducks realized they were wrong instead of just the duckling finding his real family." Liam smiled, recognizing David's influence in her thinking. His son had a gift for seeing stories from angles that adults missed, always asking why characters couldn't just talk through their problems instead of suffering in silence. That's a good idea. Sometimes the people who are different aren't the ones who need to change. As he began reading, giving each character a distinct voice, Liam found himself relaxing into the routine. Sophia leaned against his arm unconsciously, the way David did during bedtime stories, and for a moment, the expensive uniform she wore and the marble floors of Westfield Academy faded away. She was just a child who needed someone to read to pay attention, to care whether she felt heard and valued. The story flowed between them, Liam's voice shifting to capture the cruel taunting of the farmyard animals, the gentle wisdom of the old woman who tried to help, the confusion and pain of the young swan who couldn't understand why he didn't belong anywhere. When he reached the traditional ending, where the ugly duckling discovers he's actually a beautiful swan, he paused. "What do you think should happen next?" he asked Sophia. She considered this seriously, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I think the swan should go back to the farm, not to show off or make them feel bad, but to help other animals who feel different. And maybe the ducks would apologize and realize that being different isn't bad. It's just different. So instead of flying away to live with other swans, he'd stay and make the farm a better place for everyone?" Exactly. Because running away doesn't really solve anything, does it? It just means the next different animal will have the same problems. The wisdom in her words struck Liam unexpectedly. Here was an 8-year-old who understood something many adults struggled with, the difference between escaping a problem and solving it. He wondered if she was thinking about her own situation, the way she spent evenings alone while her mother built her empire in boardrooms across the city. "That's a much better ending," Liam said, and meant it. "Should we write it down? Make our own version of the story?" Sophia's eyes lit up. "Could we? Is that allowed?" "I don't see why not. Stories belong to everyone who reads them. We're just adding our own thoughts." Liam pulled a small notebook from his uniform pocket, the one he used to keep track of maintenance schedules and supply orders. "Here, you dictate and I'll write." For the next 20 minutes, they crafted their alternative ending together, Sophia's imagination flowing freely as she described how the swan convinced the farm animals to celebrate differences instead of fearing them, how they created a place where every creature could contribute their unique gifts. Liam found himself adding details, suggesting dialogue, caught up in the collaborative storytelling in a way that reminded him of the elaborate fantasy worlds he and David created during long weekend mornings. They were so absorbed in their work that neither heard the approaching footsteps, until Principal Torres cleared her throat from the library entrance. Liam looked up to find Principal Torres watching them with an expression he couldn't quite read, her arms crossed and her usually warm smile replaced by something more professional. "Mr. Chen," she said, using her formal name, in a tone that made his stomach tighten. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" Liam glanced at Sophia, who had gone very still beside him. "Of course. Sophia, why don't you keep working on the story? I'll be right back." He followed Principal Torres into the hallway, his mind racing through possible infractions. Was he supposed to stay away from students? Had someone complained about him spending time with Sophia instead of focusing on his cleaning duties? The notebook felt heavy in his pocket, evidence of time stolen from his official responsibilities. "Is there a problem?" he asked once they were out of Sophia's earshot. Principal Torres studied his face for a long moment before responding. "I had an interesting conversation with Rebecca Mitchell this morning. She mentioned that you've been reading to Sophia after hours." Liam's heart sank. "I can stop if it's inappropriate. I just saw that she was alone and thought—" "She also mentioned," Principal Torres continued, "that Sophia talked about nothing else during their drive home last night. Apparently, it was the most animated conversation they'd had in months." The words caught Liam off guard. He had expected criticism, possibly a warning about maintaining professional boundaries. Instead, Principal Torres looked almost pleased. "Rebecca Mitchell is not an easy woman to impress," the principal said, her voice dropping to a more conversational tone. "She's demanding, exacting, and has very specific ideas about what's appropriate for her daughter. But she called to thank me personally for having such caring staff members. She said Sophia seemed genuinely happy for the first time since they moved to Denver." Relief flooded through Liam so quickly it left him dizzy. "So, it's okay? Me reading to her?" "More than okay. In fact, I'd like to suggest something." Principal Torres glanced back toward the library, where they could hear Sophia humming to herself softly. "We've been discussing ways to improve our aftercare program, especially for students who stay late regularly. What would you think about formalizing this arrangement, making story time an official part of your duties for students who need stay after hours?" The suggestion took Liam completely by surprise. "You mean like getting paid to read to kids?" "I mean creating a program that serves children who might otherwise be sitting alone in empty rooms until their parents remember to collect them." Principal Torres's expression grew serious. "Sophia isn't the only student dealing with this situation. We have several children whose parents work late regularly, and they could all benefit from what you're providing." Liam thought about David, how much he treasured their reading time together, how stories had helped him process his grief and confusion after Maria's death. The idea that he could offer that same comfort to other children, that it could be part of his job rather than something he squeezed in between cleaning duties, felt almost too good to be true. "I'd need to run it past the board," Principal Torres continued, "but I think they'd approve a small budget increase, especially if it means better outcomes for our students and happier parents." "What about my regular duties, the cleaning?" "We'd adjust your schedule. Start an hour earlier, focus the intensive cleaning on areas that aren't being used for story time. It would mean longer days, but also more meaningful work." Longer days meant less time with David, but it also meant the possibility of helping children like Sophia, kids who needed someone to notice them, to care whether they felt valued and heard. It was the kind of opportunity Liam had never imagined would come his way, a chance to use his experience as a father in a professional capacity. "I'd like to think about it," he said finally. "Talk it over with my son." "Of course. Take your time." Principal Torres smiled, the warmth returning to her expression. "But don't take too long. Something tells me Sophia is expecting another story tomorrow night, and I'd hate to disappoint her." When Liam returned to the library, he found Sophia had filled 2 more pages of the notebook with careful handwriting, her version of their alternative ending, complete with detailed descriptions of how each farm animal contributed to their new community. She looked up eagerly as he approached, her face glowing with accomplishment. "I finished it. Do you want to hear what I wrote?" "I'd love to," Liam said, settling back onto the carpet beside her. As she began reading her words aloud, her voice growing stronger and more confident with each sentence, he found himself imagining what it would be like to do this every evening, to make story time an official part of his work at Westfield Academy. The future suddenly felt full of possibility in a way it hadn't since Maria's diagnosis. Not just for him, but for Sophia and other children who needed someone to see them, to value their thoughts and dreams, to remind them that every story could have a better ending if someone cared enough to imagine it. Outside the library windows, Denver's skyline twinkled with office lights, each one representing someone working late, someone choosing career over family time, someone leaving a child to wait in empty rooms. But inside this space, surrounded by books and imagination, Liam felt like they were creating something different, something better. A place where children mattered more than meetings, where stories could heal the spaces that busy adults left behind. 3 weeks into their new routine, Liam had settled into a rhythm that felt more natural than any job he'd ever held. He'd start his shift at 4, rushing through the mechanical tasks of emptying trash bins and mopping floors, always keeping one eye on the clock. By 6, he'd have his cart parked outside the library, a small collection of books tucked beside his cleaning supplies, ready for whatever stories Sophia wanted to explore that evening. The program had grown beyond just the two of them. Word had spread among parents who worked late, and now 4
regularly stayed for story time. There was Marcus, a shy 10-year-old whose single mother worked double shifts at the hospital, and twin sisters Emma and Lily, whose father traveled constantly for business. But Sophia remained Liam's most dedicated audience, always arriving first and staying latest. Her enthusiasm for reimagining classic tales infectious among the small group. Tonight was different, though. Liam could sense it the moment he entered the library. Sophia sat in her usual spot, but her posture was rigid, her hands clenched in her lap. The other children were clustered around the table near the windows, their voices unusually subdued. Something had happened. Something that had shifted the careful balance they'd built over these past weeks. "Hey there," Liam said softly, approaching Sophia's corner. "Rough day?" She looked up at him with eyes that seemed older than her 8 years. The kind of expression Liam had seen on David's face during Maria's worst days in the hospital. "My mom got in trouble because of me, because of us, because of story time." Liam's stomach dropped. He'd been so careful, so conscious of maintaining appropriate boundaries while still providing the connection these children craved. Principal Torres had assured him the program was officially sanctioned, that parents were supportive. What could have gone wrong? "What kind of trouble?" he asked, settling beside her on the carpet. "There was a meeting today, a big one, with important people. I heard Rom talking to her assistant about it." Sophia's voice grew smaller with each word. "Someone said it was inappropriate for the CEO's daughter to be spending time with the custodial staff. They said it looked bad for the company's image." The words hit Liam like physical blows. He'd known this was a possibility, had felt the occasional stares from other parents when they picked up their children and saw him reading to the group. But he'd hoped that results would speak louder than prejudice, that the obvious improvement in the children's behavior and happiness would outweigh social conventions. "What else did you hear?" he asked gently. "They want Mom to pull me out of Westfield Academy, send me to boarding school, where there's proper supervision and I won't be exposed to inappropriate influences." She said the last part in a mockingly adult tone that broke Liam's heart. "They said you're trying to take advantage of our family, that you're probably planning to ask for money or a special treatment." Anger flared in Liam's chest, hot and immediate. He'd spent 3 years at this school maintaining perfect professional boundaries, never asking for anything beyond his paycheck,
never expecting recognition for the extra care he took with maintenance tasks. The idea that anyone could see his genuine affection for these children as some kind of calculated scheme made him want to storm into Rebecca Mitchell's office and defend himself. But then he looked at Sophia's face, saw the fear and confusion there, and realized his anger wasn't the priority. She needed reassurance, not his righteous indignation. "Sophia, look at me," he said firmly. "I want you to understand something very clearly. I read stories with you because you're a remarkable kid who deserves to be heard and valued, not because I want anything from your family, not because I'm trying to gain some advantage, because you matter exactly as you are. But what if they make Mom pull me out of Westfield Academy, send me to boarding school where there's proper supervision and I won't be exposed to inappropriate influences?" The question pierced through Liam's composure. Over these weeks, he'd grown genuinely attached to Sophia and the other children, looked forward to their conversations about character motivations and alternative endings. The idea of losing that connection, of these kids being shuffled off to institutions where their emotional needs might be overlooked again, was devastating. "We'll figure something out," he promised, though he had no idea how to make good on those words. "Your mom loves you, Sophia. Whatever decision she makes, it'll be because she thinks it's best for you." "Does she,
Though, the question came out so quietly, Liam almost missed it. "Love me, I mean? She's always working, always busy with something more important. Sometimes I think she keeps me around because she's supposed to, not because she wants to." The pain in her voice was so raw, so familiar from his own struggles with David during the worst days, that Liam had to swallow hard before responding. "Parents show love in different ways," he said carefully. "Your mom works hard to provide for you, to build a company that might be yours someday. That's her way of caring. But she never reads to me anymore, never asks about my day or wants to hear my stories. When's the last time she sat on the floor and just talked to me like you do?" Liam didn't have an answer for that, because Sophia was right. Rebecca Mitchell provided everything money could buy, but she'd somehow forgotten that children needed presence more than presence, attention more than affluence. The saddest part was that Liam could see how much Rebecca cared during their brief encounters, how her face softened when she looked at Sophia. She just didn't know how to bridge the gap between boardroom efficiency and bedtime stories. The sound of heels on marble interrupted his thoughts, sharp and purposeful. But tonight, Rebecca Mitchell wasn't alone. A man in an expensive suit walked beside her, his silver hair and commanding presence marking him as someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. Behind them came Principal Torres, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes worried. "Sophia," Rebecca called out, her voice more strained than usual. "Come here, please. We need to talk." Sophia's hand found Liam's, her small fingers gripping tight. "Is that one of the important people from the meeting?" she whispered. "I think so," Liam murmured back, recognizing the power dynamics at play. This wasn't just a parent picking up their child. This was a confrontation, and he was clearly the target. The man stepped forward, his gaze sweeping dismissively over Liam's uniform and the children gathered around the reading area. "You must be the custodian causing all this trouble," he said, his tone carrying the kind of casual authority that came from never being questioned. "Richard Blackwell, chairman of Mitchell Industries Board of Directors." Liam stood slowly, still holding Sophia's hand. "Liam Chen, and I'm not sure what trouble you're referring to." "Don't play innocent," Blackwell snapped. "We know exactly what you're doing here. Ingratiating yourself with the Mitchell family, creating inappropriate attachments, probably planning to leverage this relationship for personal gain. The only thing I'm doing is reading stories to children who stay late at school. Children who would otherwise be sitting alone in empty rooms. Children whose parents pay premium tuition for premium care, not to have their kids influenced by staff members who don't understand their place." Blackwell's eyes were cold, calculating. "This little charade ends now. You're terminated, effective immediately."
"You can't fire him!" Sophia burst out, stepping in front of Liam protectively. "He's the best person at this school. He actually cares about us." "Sophia, that's enough," Rebecca said sharply, but Liam caught something in her expression, a flicker of uncertainty that suggested she wasn't entirely comfortable with this confrontation either. "No, it's not enough." Sophia's voice carried surprising strength. "Mr. Blackwell thinks Liam wants our money, but he's wrong. Liam never asked for anything. He just listened to me and made me feel important and helped me understand that stories can have better endings if someone cares enough to imagine them." "Exactly the kind of inappropriate attachment we're here to address," Blackwell said dismissively. "Rebecca, this is why Sophia needs proper boarding school supervision. She's becoming too familiar with the help." The sadly cruelty of his words, the way he reduced Liam to the help while dismissing
Sophia's feelings as inappropriate sparked something dangerous in Liam's chest. He'd spent his adult life taking orders, accepting his place in hierarchies, swallowing his pride for David's sake. But watching this man treat a child's genuine affection as something shameful crossed a line he hadn't known existed. "With all due respect, Mr. Blackwell," Liam said, his military bearing asserting itself, "these children aren't attachments or problems to be solved. They're people with thoughts and feelings and needs that go beyond what money can provide. If you can't see that, maybe you're the one who doesn't understand your place." The silence that followed was deafening. Blackwell's face flushed red. Principal Torres looked horrified, and Rebecca stared at Liam with an expression he couldn't interpret. But Sophia squeezed his hand tighter, and that small gesture of support gave him the courage to continue. "You want to fire me? Fine. But don't pretend it's because I've done anything wrong. Fire me because it's easier to remove someone who reminds you of your failures than to actually address them. Fire me because a custodian who sees children as people threatens your comfortable hierarchy where money determines worth." "How dare you?" Blackwell started, but Liam wasn't finished. "I dare because these kids deserve better than adults who see their emotional needs as inconveniences. They deserve better than being shuffled off to boarding schools when they become too complicated to manage. And they especially deserve better than being taught that caring about people below your social class is somehow inappropriate." He knelt down to Sophia's level, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Remember what we talked about with the ugly duckling story? Sometimes the problem isn't with the person who's different. Sometimes the problem is with the people who can't see past their own prejudices." Sophia nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Will I ever see you again?" "I don't know," Liam said honestly, his own voice thick with emotion. "But I want you to remember something. You are smart and kind and creative, and anyone who doesn't see that is missing out on knowing an extraordinary person. Don't let anyone convince you that who you are isn't enough." As he gathered his few personal belongings and prepared to leave Westfield Academy for the last time, Liam caught Rebecca's eye. For just a moment, the corporate mask slipped, and he saw the mother underneath, the woman who was watching her daughter's heart break and couldn't figure out how to stop it. But then Blackwell was ushering Rebecca and Sophia toward the exit, already discussing boarding school options and damage control strategies. The last thing Liam heard as the library door closed behind them was Sophia calling his name, her voice echoing off the marble walls like a prayer that would never be answered. 2 months later, Liam was stocking shelves at Denver General Hospital when he heard a familiar voice calling his name. He turned to see Rebecca Mitchell standing in the pharmacy doorway, looking smaller somehow without her usual corporate armor. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her designer suit couldn't hide the weight she'd clearly lost. "I've been looking for you everywhere," she said, her voice lacking its usual authority. "Miss Mitchell," Liam set down the inventory clipboard, unsure what protocol demanded in this situation. "Is everything all right? Is Sophia okay?" "No, she's not okay. None of us are okay." Rebecca's composure cracked slightly. She refuses to eat, won't speak to me, spends all her time writing stories about custodians who save children from evil board members. The boarding school called twice this week because she keeps running away to the library." Liam's chest tightened. He thought about Sophia constantly since leaving Westfield, wondering if she was adjusting, hoping she'd found other adults who could see her worth. Apparently, his hopes had been misplaced. "I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm not sure why you're telling me this." "Because I fired Blackwell." The words came out in a rush. "I dissolved his position on the board, bought out his shares, and restructured the entire company hierarchy. Because my 8-year-old daughter showed more courage standing up for what's right than I did, and I couldn't live with that." Rebecca pulled out her phone, showing Liam a video that made his breath catch. It was security footage from the library that night, capturing his final conversation with Sophia. But more than that, it showed the pure affection between them, the way she'd held his hand for comfort, how gently he'd spoken to her, even while being attacked. "I watched this 100 times, Rebecca continued, trying to understand what Blackwell saw as inappropriate. All I could see was a man treating my daughter with the kind of patience and respect I'd forgotten how to give her." Liam remained silent, unsure where this conversation was leading. "I want to offer you a job," Rebecca said suddenly. "Not as a custodian, as Director of Family Services for Mitchell Industries. We're creating a new division focused on work-life balance, on-site childcare, family support programs. The salary is 6 figures, full benefits, and your primary responsibility would be developing programs that ensure no employee's child ever feels abandoned the way Sophia did." The offer was so unexpected, so far beyond anything Liam could have imagined, that he couldn't immediately process it. "Why would you trust me with something like that?" "Because you're the only person who looked at my daughter and saw her worth without knowing her bank account balance. Because you taught her that stories can have better endings if someone cares enough to rewrite them." Rebecca's voice grew stronger. "Because I've spent months trying to fix what I broke, and the only solution that makes sense is giving you the resources to do officially what you were already doing naturally." "What about Sophia? How does she feel about this?" Rebecca smiled for the first time since arriving. "She's in the car. She insisted on coming, said she had something important to give you whether you took the job or not." Through the pharmacy windows, Liam could see a small figure pressed against the glass of a black sedan. When Sophia spotted him looking, she held up a thick notebook, waving it excitedly. "She wrote a whole book," Rebecca explained. 50 pages of alternative fairy tale endings, where custodians become kings, where working parents learn to balance love and ambition, where children who feel invisible discover they're actually the heroes of their own stories. Liam looked at Rebecca, seeing not the intimidating CEO, but a mother who'd realized almost too late that success meant nothing if it cost her relationship with her daughter. He thought about David, about the stable future this job could provide, about the chance to help other families avoid the mistakes that had nearly destroyed this one. "When do I start?" The reunion in the parking lot was everything Liam had hoped for and more. Sophia launched herself into his arms, chattering about her stories, about the boarding school she'd hated, about how she'd known her mom would find him eventually, because that's what happens in the best endings. "I missed our story time," she said, settling into the back seat between Liam and David, who'd been picked up from his grandmother's house for this impromptu celebration. "Well then," Liam said, accepting the notebook she thrust into his hands. "Let's see what adventures you've been writing. I bet they're even better than the ones we used to tell." As Rebecca drove them toward their new beginning, Liam opened to the first page of Sophia's book. In careful 8-year-old handwriting, she'd written, "Once upon a time, there was a little girl who thought she was all alone. But then she met a custodian who taught her that the best families are the ones you choose, and the best stories are the ones where everyone gets to be important. He looked up to find her watching him expectantly. "What do you think?" "I think," Liam said, pulling both children closer, "this is the perfect beginning."
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.